Hello, my name's Peter Barrett. I'm the family representative of Linnburn Station in Central Otago, New Zealand. I'm here to talk to you today about strategic cover crop planning, a presentation I gave in Leaston at the Quorum Exchange last Friday, and I was asked to distribute this presentation. Linnburn has been a family-owned property since 1940 and was owned or managed and owned by my grandfather until his passing in 1986. From that time on, there have been different managers that have been on the farm that have done a great job looking after the stock and farming the property, but the family were quite honest, we could have done a better job in actually maintaining the asset. And so I got involved in 2007 and then came back and lived on the property on and off from 2012. And in that time we looked at how we were going to make up the gains in maintaining the asset, and we looked at traditional methods of agriculture and worked out if we were going to walk the path of synthetic fertilizers and cultivation and the like, we were going to go broke very quickly. We embraced cover cropping in 2014, and here's our story. Linnburn is located between Dunedin and Wanaka. It's 9,000 hectares and is about 25 kilometres long from the northeast to the southwest through here. We have irrigated flats in this area through here, about 500 hectares, and then we have dryland developed country through this area through here. This is what winter is like for us, or can be, and this is what summer can be, or is very, very likely to be. The same area is like this here after it's been cover cropped and lucerne introduction. Why are we doing what we're doing? At Linnburn, it's our belief that soil health is a priority. We need to use the diversity of cover crops, companion planting, zero-till and high intensity grazing instead of synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, fungicides and set stocking, with our main focus to be increasing soil carbon and improving soil health and stock health. In essence, we believe in healthy soils, which equals healthy animals and healthy people. This here just kind of gives a contrast to the environment when we use cover crops, what they can do in a challenged environment. In the background, you can see dry land that has not had any influence of cover crops, and in the front here you can. And you can see that it retains the moisture and is a bit more productive. Again, this is another photo with some ewes running in the front ground. You can see in the background the cover crop. Just going to have to bear with me a little bit, jumping around here. One of the key focuses in this whole process for us has been understanding things by Gabe Brown. He's a gentleman that I first spoke to in 2014 and then started listening to a lot of his stuff online. And his key principles of soil health are limited disturbance of soil, keep armour on the soil so the soil is always protected, ensure you have diversity of plants and animal species. And he talks how animals are critical to the whole process, and that when an animal eats a piece of a plant, then the plant goes into a bit of stress and photosynthesizes more, then providing more carbon or liquid carbon into the ground. Keep living roots as long as possible in the ground and integrate animals. Okay, adding value through no-till and cover crops. You can see here we've got a stand of rye corn and other stuff that we're crimp rolling to create a natural mulch, and then we're drilling a cover crop directly into that behind it. And here we're drilling into other pasture as well that we may have sprayed a little bit or may have not, I cannot recall exactly. But we're drilling into existing stuff instead of doing the traditional spray, wait for things to die, cultivate, and put fertilizer and everything in there, and prepare a seed bed and then go again. What we're really doing is we're banking on being able to keep life going in the soil to keep feeding liquid carbon, and so we're drilling in again. When we're looking at cover cropping, one of the key aspects of the whole thing is it's about actually understanding before you go and implement what your resource concerns are. And Gabe Brown talks a lot about this in his book, but it's understanding what you're trying to achieve. It's like if you have compacted soil, or you're trying to build organic matter, or you need to get nitrogen cycling, or you need to make phosphorus and potassium available, or get nutrient cycling and get the microbiology working. It's worth understanding what your resource concerns are, what your limitations are. Where we were, we had a lack of worms, sleepy soil. Just in different parts of the farm, we've got all sorts of issues, and we're continually trying to work on them. One of the big things I found though is actually getting nutrient cycling and the microbiology working. It's a critical component, and I'll talk about that as we go through this. This here is one of the aha moments, I guess you could say, on our property. This is a paddock that has, obviously in this photo, diverse species. But in the lead up to putting this in sort of 2013, I think we were sitting down with a fertilizer representative, and we'd planted ryegrass and clover in this paddock, and it's got high salt in its base saturation, this paddock, and we'd planted, like I said, ryegrass and clover, and nothing had grown after putting in a fertilizer recommendation. And we're sitting there with a fertilizer rep, and we're asking, okay, what do we do this year? And they said, well, just put in what you put in last year and then sow something again. And that was kind of my experience of actually going, hey, I feel like we're being sold something. My background wasn't actually in farming, so I really was in very much a learning process, and I still am. But that really made us go, okay, we've got to look at something different and start changing things up. At the same time, we'd got a guy called Graham Shepherd down to the farm, and we learned about visual soil assessments and being able to assess all our paddocks. And so through all our paddocks, we did what's called a VSA in 2014 and came up with results. In this area here, we did visual soil assessments. This is just some of the developed dry country at the time. And we came up with these results, and we learnt that we didn't have any earthworms at all in the pastures. And so that was a little concerning. We were reasonable when it came to our results with everything, but the earthworms and the life were quite noticeable. And that was partly because of our grazing management, where we'd been grazing things down to very low covers, but it was a bit more complex than that. At the same time, what we did is we did petrometer work, where we run around with a metal stick, and then we put it into the ground to be able to understand our compaction issues and mark that with GPSs. We recorded the results, as we've gone. So in effect, we've got a baseline of exactly what our soils were like at different times, and very shortly, we've actually had Landcare Research in here in recent times to record more information, and at some stage we'll go back and revisit really how we're going. With that existing, that pasture, we let it go to seed and let everything go crazy, which is obviously not what normally people do, and then we hit it with intensive livestock per hectare, and all of a sudden we had worms. And it really was driven by the diverse sort of root structures and everything that was in the ground. Once it had been smashed to pieces, then you had the residue that then fed the biology, and we let that go and then drilled back into it. This here was a cover crop species that what I call a setup for perennials. So what we're doing there is we're going with cover crops to be able to drive more carbon into the ground, feed the biology, get everything cycling, and then further down the road we will introduce other diversity with perennials. This here is another photo of what I call another setup pasture. Most of the things we're putting in the ground are either brassicas or cover crops that do different things, and I'll talk about the benefits of each of them shortly. These are my parents and my aunt standing in what is obviously some pretty impressive sunflowers, and like the sunflowers are used for cultivation, and they provide a pathway into deeper areas within the soil structure, so that then nutrients can be derived from lower down, and when they decompose, you can have other roots that follow them down. It's kind of similar to you've got something that's keeping the soil open, and when you've got lots of different root structures, when you're using implements to till, then what you do is you open it for a period, and then it just comes back more compacted. You can see here stock standing in the in different areas in a similar sort of pasture, and here again you can see the diversity of what we've got in there. It's got a little bit out of control. So here, that's vetch in the same area, and then this one here is actually, you've got the bees on Phacelia, and if you wanted to learn a little bit about native bees and what they've been able to do on our property, you can search native bees at Linnburn Station, and you'll have someone talking about the life of the birds and the bees and what have you. And then here is just an image of Integrity Soils visiting the farm to do an infiltration test, where we're actually seeing the water. I can't remember the exact result, but they measure an inch of water going into the soil, and it was in quite impressive time. And you've got two of the guys here from the farm, and they've done a great job in actually getting everything up and going. Then in this photo here, you've got stock in there where we introduce lambs and the like into the actual pastures to eat them, and they can pick and eat whatever they choose. And when they've eaten everything, they smash it to the ground, and you can see this, and then that goes into feeding the underground livestock, the biology. This here is an image from the USDA, or the Agriculture Department in the United States. And when I started to get into cover crops, I started to understand, okay, where do we fit in this sort of climatic zones? And this is in Fahrenheit, but on our property we're at about 400 meters, and we go through to 1300 meters, and you can see we're in this sort of climate. So we go from negative 10, or even can go lower. I think the coldest it's been in Ranfurly is about negative 23. And it's not unheard of us to get to about 40 degrees and very, very warm with a hairdryer wind. And so this here is relevant, because when I go to the next slide, which actually shows different species of cover crops here, you won't be able to see it all: buckwheat, linseed, safflower, sunflower. I can actually look at what are the attributes that these plants provide, and you can look at whether they're hardy or not, and that's where the previous slide comes into play, where I can see what things are going to be able to tolerate my environment in the winter, I guess. But that does not stop me from sowing them in the spring or in the summer or in the autumn, and it's just actually understanding how they'll function. I can also look at the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and if you look at decomposition, 1 to 20 or thereabouts is where you get very or increased decomposition. You got the seeds and the maturity and what sort of plant it is, legume, broadleaf, brassica, or whatever it is, whether it scavenges nitrogen, whether it can be grazed, whether it can be used for silage, what sort of root it has. This is critical when it comes to understanding or breaking up pans, because essentially the more roots you have in your soil, the quicker you can increase carbon, because photosynthesizing light and then generating liquid carbon coming out the root exudates to feed the biology, only helps you build soil. And that's where you see this sort of stuff. What is a soil builder and what is not. And then I can go to this side of things and I can see this is buckwheat over here. It's not, you won't be able to see it quite so well because of how I grabbed it on the screen presentation, but it renders phosphorus and potassium available to the soil in a big way. And it's also very good at beneficial organisms like bees and pollinators. And it has a short growth time, so you can see what different things, and then you come down to sunflower and you can see it's very good at dealing with surface compaction, beneficial organisms. It's got a short growth time. It's a warm season plant. Balancia clovers, all the clovers, what they're doing and how they're helping you in different places. So this is something I can pull together probably about 2014, and it's been very, very helpful in helping me understand what's beneficial and what's not. You can see here 1 is poor and 10 is excellent. This is our seeding area in here, and this is where we mix stuff we come up with mixes, and you'll see them as I go through this presentation, and put them in the concrete mixer. And then sometimes if we're inoculating different things like lucerne, we put it out here like this. This is what a mix looks like after it's been mixed, and people often ask me what happens to the smaller seeds fall to the bottom, and I say they don't. They are consistent, but it's cover cropping. We're not after perfection. All we want to do is be able to get seed in the ground, get them to germinate, and start, providing liquid carbon into the soil profile to increase our carbon, which in turn increases our water holding capacity and our nutrient holding capacity. When it comes to implementation strategies for cover crops and perennials, there's a lot of different strategies on how to do this, and we started out doing traditional stuff where you would spray stuff out with 5 litres of glyphosate and then wait for it to be killed and then direct drill into it. Even before that, at one stage we did a little bit of cultivation, but then we quickly learned that cultivation is the biggest no-no of all, because it actually releases, you oxidize the carbon in the ground and it goes into the atmosphere as CO2. So what we have is we have different strategies in preparing under any regime, and that is you don't spray with anything. You just graze the pasture to the bottom, right down to the boards next to the soil profile, and then you drill straight into it. And that is something that you can use at different times of the year. If you have a dry time, which we do in February, you can even drill in the dry when everything else is dormant or not able to grow, and utilize that. The other strategy is to use glyphosate or Roundup at, let's say, 1 litre, and then buffer it with 4 to 8 litres of fish or hydroslate, and then also some humic acid or fulvic acid. And I make the humic acid by getting 1,000 litres of water in a pod and then putting 100 kilograms of humate in there and just mixing it up, and then I take 20 litres of that and then mix it in, and we use that. The other way is using a crimping roller to flatten cereal rye, or what's called rye corn in New Zealand, to flatten it and crimp it, so that then it creates a natural mulch and you can drill in through that. Or you use stock like cattle, or intensive stocking, where they come in and they eat 30-40% of the pasture and trample the rest and create a natural mulch on the perennials or on even other cover crops, and you drill through that. Now when you see here, I've got 1 to 3 is a strategy where you try and work out how you're going to get your preparation. Then you might go into annual cover crops only, and then once you're out of that, you might go into annual cover crops. Then you might go into annual cover crops and perennials. I've worked that strategy, and that is a strategy that I'll show you shortly, but that's something that Gabe Brown advocates. But I think the key thing with this whole thing is there is no, that's how you always do it. And so I've used it where we've done these strategies over here, or we've used it where we only go annual cover crops for 1 year, and then we go annual cover crops and perennials, and then annual cover crops and perennials. And when you're doing this, you're not terminating anything in between. You're trying to pick times when you can get in and put the seed in, and you're banking on nature to take care of it. And you can even go annual cover crops and perennials straight off the bat, and just drill into different things. So They all work, and if you're interested in learning more about them, I recommend that you listen to Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil. One of the key things I touched on before is nutrients not cycling, and if you've been working, or it's my belief and my experience that if you've been working in an environment where you have tillage, synthetic fertilizers, and you've been using pesticides and herbicides, both on perennial pastures and the like, then there's a high probability that you have a lot of fungi and bacteria in the ground that's dormant or is not there. And so you won't have nutrient cycling as well as you need them to be. So your pastures, in effect, have been drug addicts, and you need to get them clean. So part of this is getting nutrients to cycle. You need to learn how to feed the livestock below the ground, the microbiology, and that is where I'm saying you're leaving the residue on the ground to go back in. It's not about utilizing 100% for always your livestock above the ground, and it's also getting to utilize covers that are a bit higher than you're probably normally used to. One of the things that I've used as part of this, and I learnt it from Nicole Masters from Integrity Soils, is using the soil food web test from Cheryl Prue, and then you can look at your bacteria and fungi ratios, and a lot of the focus in there is on what's active and what's there and what's not active. We don't know all our fungi and bacteria, but we can measure what's active and what's not. And if you listen to Gabe Brown's book, he'll talk about different ratios, but other people often talk about getting a 1-to-1 ratio of fungi to bacteria. Just coming back, this is a solution that Gabe Brown puts out there as a way to increase or improve nutrient cycling in perennial pastures. It's not about using herbicides, and he talks about just experimenting, and that's my experience. You just got to experiment, try things, see what works on your property, see what doesn't work. And I highly recommend you reading his book. But in the autumn, you're sowing something like triticale with rye corn and a vetch directly into perennials without herbicide. So to do that, you may have grazed the perennial very, very hard before you drill it. And then in that spring, you allow the triticale and rye corn just about to flower, and then you eat 35% of it, and you trample the residual to create a cover over the living perennials. You don't till the soil, so you're actually creating a natural mulch that's suppressing the perennials, and then you can drill things like another mix in, warm season, like sorghum sudan and millet, which have huge root masses with a forage like kale and daikon radish, because daikon radish is a great thing for actually growing and providing a nitrogen sink, with say maybe some ryegrass, some clovers, buckwheat for phosphorus and potassium, sunflower as your cultivation, likewise your radish, you get your big tubers for your cultivators. And then going into the autumn, you may repeat your autumn or something different where you can get that seed, and so when you come into spring, you can actually create that residual mulch. And then in the spring, you're going into something again, you can see there, and you keep the cycle going, and you can at any time introduce different perennials. And if you look at Gabe, Gabe and Brown's Ranch, they've got a multitude of different perennials, up to 40 or 50. This is actually his book, where you can actually get it on Audible. There's a link down the bottom there, or you can just search it, and you can find out about it. I highly recommend listening to his book. His knowledge is golden, and so is his book. When it comes to the disadvantages, you can see there again the disadvantages of different things, and whether they create weeds, whether they're an insect nematode risk. And if you're an arable farmer, this is very, very important information. How am I going to terminate? Is it a till kill, a chem kill, or can I mow it? You've got the genus species in there that help you as well. But if you're a sheep and beef farmer like myself, then the termination side of things is not such a critical thing. What you're really trying to do is keep things in diversity in the pasture and keep things going. And so, it's like, as Gabe talks about, organised chaos is really what you're trying to create. Then in your planting, you can see, what's the depth. Well, when you've got when you've got 30 species in a mix, your planting depth really goes out. But you do have to be mindful of germination temperature, especially when you're using things like sorghum. You need to get to 15 degrees. And so you've got to be looking at, okay, when am I going to put things out and how am I going to do it? This is a little thing I did with regard to what's the percentage of kilograms to a hectare on a monoculture, and then you go from that and you just, how many things have I got in my mix? You make it up. Do I want 5%, 15%, 20% of that product? And when you're putting in perennials, and you just make it up as you go and experiment, and you find out what works. Again, here, tolerance. Are they good with heat, drought, shade? Can they deal with flood? What sort of pH? So it's just more information that can help you in some of your decisions. This here is, you can see some of our dry developed country where this is another setup pasture where we're just really trying to activate the biology by getting this in the ground and get it out there and so we can set up to go into more perennials as we go. That's what that looks like when it's close up and personal. You can see myself there with petrometer and Gareth, the farm manager, in the background with a shovel, where you put a shovel in and you can see the root structure, how it's opened up, the soil profile, and you've got roots going everywhere, and it's just allowing everything to function. It's great. After we've done the setup stuff, then we get into perennial sort of things, and this is a perennial pasture. You can see the buckwheat in here with the black oats and the clovers and the lucernes and the like. And we do a lot of mixing. This is quite time consuming, but I highly recommend trying to do it, because then you got little bits of everything doing different things. This pasture then can go in and be like this here, where you can see it gets into the craziness. What you're doing when you're allowing soil to get this sort of, or the pasture to get this sort of high, is you're creating your own little microclimate in here, like a glass house, where if you're not getting heaps of rain, it's keeping the moisture, it's freeing the soil up to basically do what it does to be able to get to a healthy stage with carbon and everything in it. And when you get in there, you can pick the soil up, and it's like a black cottage cheese. It's quite amazing, the transformation. We used to keep these sort of paddocks at very, very low levels of 1,500 to 3,000, and in the summer when it gets very hot, it just does not last, and you don't retain your moisture. When you're putting this sort of stuff in, it really, really helps. And so that's got a lucerne base in the bottom, and I'll show you how that sort of plays out. This is Gareth again in an area we didn't have a couple of years back. We didn't have any rain from July to the middle of, or the February, which is the middle of our summer. And in the background here, we've got lucerne, and nothing grew. The lucerne, this is like latter part of October. The lucerne's not even green yet, but you can see the cover crop that's been planted is just standing up and talking to us. And you've got a symbiotic relationship between plants. It's just unexplainable. You got the mustards and everything working together with the phacelia and the sunflowers, and here we had the lucerne. So this here was a little bit later, a month or so later, and you can see what's happening. It's got a little bit higher in that same paddock, and then you can see other areas of the paddocks where you can see what's going on. And then when it's been grazed and everything, then you get the lucerne and the other grasses, other perennials coming back, so it can be grazed again. So that's what comes back without sowing again. That's the under sowing of what was in there. So that's one of the key attributes in our environment, is actually being able to use lucerne and other coxfids, brooms, and everything to play their role in a challenged environment. What we also use here is we use biological stimulants, where we're out spraying and mixing. This is a mixer. This is a 5,000 litre mixing tank where we come up with fixed hydroslate, water, a little bit of seawater, seaweed, a little bit of fine lime, calcium, that's about 98% calcium, humate, and even horehound decomposers. If we decompose weeds, we try to get rid of and get it to sort of black gooey stuff and throw it in the mixer and throw it out when we're trying to get rid of it. And this is sort of the environment, how we do it. It's a Chaos Spring sprayer, tow and fert, but we got this one out of the Coromandel. It's a very affordable bit of kit. And last year we did about 800 hectares, and it's been fantastic. It's not about being precise either. It's just about getting it out, and you're not trying to be like spraying glyphosate. You're basically feeding life. And in here you'll see we've got yeast, we've got seawater. Seawater is one of nature's best compost teas. It's got every element, but it's also got lots of bacteria and fungi in it. You do have to be careful with making sure you put water in with it to be able to make sure you don't burn your pastures and that sort of stuff. The molasses, the sugars, the energies, and the humate, which all work together to really get that nutrient cycling. This is a book that I highly recommend that you listen to. You can get it on Audible, this link below. Growing a Revolution by David Montgomery. He also wrote a book called The Hidden Half of Nature. It's another book that really opened my ideas to biology, and how the biology in your colon is actually the same stuff that's in the soil, and everything goes back to the soil. And in essence, the soil is simply a plant's stomach. This is another person I highly recommend listening to, Christine Jones. I went and listened to her in Balclutha one time, and she's got a website called Amazing Carbon. And she just opened my eyes to saying, listen, hey, 95% of life on land resides in the soil. I think it's something like if you have a cup of soil, or not even that much, there's more living things in there than there are humans on the planet. She focuses on light farming and the liquid carbon pathway, and talks about the importance of using diversity to harness the energy of the sun. She says diversity creates many green solar panels that take sunlight and then turn it into different forms of liquid carbon that pass through a plant and out its root exudates to feed the soil biology. This is key to building soil carbon. Plant diversity with different roots aerating the soil is critical. When you look at a monoculture with ryegrass and clover, it's not diverse enough, and the roots are not diverse enough, and neither are you could say, your green solar panels. This is the carbon cycle, and this is one of the critical pieces here. This is the key component that we can influence. It's my belief that when we're tilling the soil, you're removing mycorrhizal fungi, and that's one of the key attributes in creating symbiotic relationships in the soil. You're breaking that, and not using diverse pastures, as well as not using synthetic fertilized pesticides and herbicides, we decrease the microbiological activity. So our fungi and bacteria are not working when we're farming under what I call some will call a conventional system, and then as a result we decrease soil carbon. And in my mind, the correct place for carbon is in the soil. Carbon in soil is nature's cleansing agent. Low soil carbon means poor soil structure, less water and nutrient holding capacity. Heavy rain on low carbon soils equals water, soil and nutrients exiting the land and polluting waterways. So the critical takeaway from this is if you increase your soil carbon, you increase your water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity. And to my mind, I've seen it's worth doing. It's like one of the things I always think about is if you're sick or someone has a drug overdose, they go to hospital and they use carbon to cleanse them. If you look on the periodic table, you can see why carbon binds with things, because it's so central and is able to bind with a lot of other elements. Another thing that's worth understanding is a nitrogen cycle. It really baffles me and why people are using liquid nitrogen. We've got 78% in the atmosphere. Above every hectare, that's 74,000 tonnes of nitrogen. Soil biology are key to the nitrogen cycle. And it's my opinion that if you're using synthetic fertilizers and liquid nitrogen, then you're removing their function and they're not active, and then your cycle is not functioning. And so if you take them out, then you get your cycle working, then all of a sudden you're able to take a lot of cost out of your business. One of the critical components to our business has actually been going to different workshops with Integrity Soils, and Nicole Masters. She is incredible. She's got a book coming out soon, and her knowledge is definitely worth tapping into. I highly recommend going to one of these workshops. I've been to a couple of them, and there's another one I think in February coming, and I plan to go to that. Another thing we've embraced from doing this sort of thing is just reading different things. This here's a book on natural sheep care, and we're taking out minerals to be able to be free choice for a stock to self-medicate, and that's something that I recommend you get involved in. Where to from here? Well, I think the critical key thing for you is whatever you're doing, I think it's worth experimenting. Using cover crops and regenerative agriculture, you can decrease costs hugely. I think from our implementation costs, we've been able to effectively take the cost that we use to do 250 hectares and take that out to 900 odd hectares. So you can see there's huge cost savings. So if you're looking to get into this, what do you need to do? My approach would be, I wouldn't say to go and do any soil testing. I'd say go and find a reasonable bit of your land, maybe even half a hectare or a hectare or two. Get some seeds, at least 10 of them. Come up with a mix based on the info in here. By all means, if you want to give me a yell, I'm happy to help you and try and answer any questions. Use one of the implementation methods, but probably if you're doing it for the first time, I'd recommend using a little bit of glyphosate, because the other ones, timing is quite critical to them. Glyphosate with a buffer of fish hydroslate and humate. Spray it out today, drill today or tomorrow, and then watch what happens. If you want to get in contact with me, you can see my contact details there. You can email me at covercrops@Linnburn Station, or my phone number. We've got a website that's going to be up and available shortly with other things that you can help you with. And if you're really interested in getting involved in regenerative agriculture and you're looking for a new employment opportunity, don't be afraid to give us a yell. So thanks everyone, and I hope this has been beneficial.